Part 1. Is it better to be loved than feared? For centuries, our stories, our ethics, our entire conception of a good leader has revolved around the answer being a resounding yes. We want the beloved boss, the compassionate ruler, the leader who inspires through affection. But what if this cherished belief is not just wrong, but dangerous? 500 years ago, in the heart of Renaissance Florence, a disgraced diplomat named Niccolò Machiavelli wrote a slender book that would scandalize the world. In The Prince, he gave advice that cut through centuries of moral philosophy with a chilling pragmatism. He argued that, while it would be best to be both loved and feared, the two rarely come together. And if a leader must choose, he declared, it is much safer to be feared than loved. This is not a comfortable thought. It feels like a forbidden truth, a secret whispered by tyrants. Yet what if Machiavelli wasn't a teacher of evil, but a teacher of reality? What if he saw a fundamental weakness in human nature that we, in our modern world, have chosen to ignore at our peril? What if our relentless pursuit of being liked is, in fact, our most profound vulnerability? Part 2. Consider a scenario you have almost certainly witnessed, or perhaps even lived. The nice boss. The people pleaser. This is a leader who sees their primary role as maintaining harmony. Their greatest fear is not failure, but friction. They want to be liked, to be seen as a friend, an advocate, a supporter. And so, they avoid conflict at all costs. They sugarcoat difficult feedback, transforming necessary criticism into a confusing, vague suggestion. A study from Harvard Business Review revealed that over 20% of managers admit to avoiding negative feedback entirely, often out of a desire to be nice and polite. This is the manager who, instead of telling an employee their work is unacceptable, says something like, "I know you didn't have much time to prepare, and I probably should have helped you more." They prioritize sparing short-term feelings, a behavior that leadership expert Kim Scott has given a devastatingly accurate name: ruinous empathy. It's empathy that, in its attempt to be kind, ultimately destroys. This leader seeks consensus for every decision, believing that inclusion will foster unity. But this quest for universal agreement often leads to organizational paralysis. Bold ideas are watered down into mediocre compromises, and crucial decisions are delayed until the opportunity has passed. The team drifts without clear direction because the leader is afraid to make a firm call that might upset someone. The consequences of this leadership style are as predictable as they are catastrophic. The first to suffer are the team's highest performers. These are the individuals who thrive on challenge and high standards. They watch in frustration as mediocrity is tolerated and underperformance goes unaddressed. They see that accountability is non-existent. Eventually they leave, seeking an environment where their efforts are matched and excellence is the goal. Studies consistently show that poor leadership is a primary driver of employee turnover, and ironically, the nice boss often has one of the highest attrition rates. What remains is a culture of artificial harmony. Because conflict is avoided, it doesn't disappear. It goes underground. Resentment brews. Gossip replaces direct communication. A meeting after the meeting becomes the only place where truth is spoken. Trust in the leader evaporates because the team sees that the leader's need to be liked is more important than their duty to lead. They may have started out as a well-intentioned advocate, but they end up perceived as weak, indecisive, and ultimately ineffective. The final tragic irony is that the business itself fails. The very entity the leader sought to protect through harmony is destroyed by the lack of clarity and accountability that harmony produced. The leader who was too nice to make the tough calls ends up making the toughest call of all, laying everyone off. This presents a profound and deeply confusing puzzle of modern life. We are conditioned to believe that kindness, empathy, and a desire to be liked are virtues. Yet in the high-stakes world of leadership, in business, in politics, in any collective endeavor, these very qualities, when misapplied, become the seeds of failure. We are trying to be good, but we are producing bad results. Why? Why does our instinct to be loved so often lead to ruin? To find the answer, we must turn the clock back 500 years, to a man who dared to look at power, not for what it should be, but for what it truly is. Part 3. To solve the puzzle of the failed nice guy, we must enter the world of Niccolò Machiavelli. For centuries, his name has been synonymous with evil, a byword for cunning, manipulation, and ruthless ambition. But to dismiss him as a teacher of evil is to miss the point entirely. Machiavelli was, above all, a political realist. He was a man who had seen his beloved Florence torn apart by invasions, conspiracies, and weak leadership. He was tortured and exiled by the powerful Medici family, and in that solitude, he wrote The Prince not as a manual for gangsters, but as a clear-eyed analysis of power in the world as it is, not as we wish it were. His entire philosophy begins with a cold, unflinching assessment of human nature. Men, he writes, are ungrateful, fickle, liars and deceivers, fearful of danger and greedy for gain. They are driven by immediate needs and self-interest. This isn't a moral condemnation. It is a statement of political physics. To build a stable state, a leader must work with the materials they have, not the materials they imagine. And the material of humanity, Machiavelli argues, is fundamentally unreliable. This is the foundation for his most infamous lesson. A leader who relies on love is building their house on sand. Love, he explains, is a chain of obligation which, since men are a sorry lot, is broken on every occasion in which their own self-interest is concerned. Love is a gift given by your subjects. It is dependent on their whims, their moods, their fortunes. It is, therefore, outside of your control. And a wise prince, Machiavelli insists, builds his power on what is his own, not on what belongs to others. Fear, on the other hand, is entirely within the prince's control. It is maintained by a dread of punishment which is ever present. While love is a feeling your subjects can choose to withdraw, fear is a calculation they are forced to make. They obey not because they feel loyal, but because they understand the consequences of disloyalty. Fear is a stable, predictable currency of power. Love is volatile and subject to inflation. But here we arrive at the most crucial and most widely misunderstood part of his argument. Machiavelli is adamant. A prince may be feared, but he must, at all costs, avoid being hated. Hatred is the seed of rebellion. Fear maintains order. Hatred destroys it. So, where is the line? Machiavelli draws it with surgical precision. A prince avoids hatred, he says, as long as he abstains from the property of his citizens and subjects and from their women. He must never take what is not his. He famously observes that men more quickly forget the death of their father than the loss of their patrimony. This is a profound insight. Fear is a political tool, applied impersonally to enforce the law and maintain the state. When a prince executes a traitor for a manifest cause, it inspires fear of transgression. But when he seizes a family's land or violates their home, the act becomes personal. It is seen as arbitrary, predatory, and unjust. That is what breeds hatred. The feared leader punishes you for what you do. The hated leader punishes you for who he is. This leads to his concept of the economy of violence. Machiavelli argues that a few swift, decisive acts of well-used cruelty to establish order are ultimately more merciful than a weak, compassionate leadership that allows disorders to arise from which follow murders or robberies. The execution of a few criminals harms only individuals. The chaos of a lawless state harms everyone. This is not a love of violence, but a pragmatic calculation to use the minimum force necessary to prevent a greater harm. The goal is to make the use of violence diminish over time as stability takes root. All of this is part of a grander struggle between two forces that Machiavelli believed govern our lives: Fortuna and Virtù. Fortuna, or fortune, is the wild, unpredictable chaos of the world. It is everything outside of our control. Machiavelli personifies it as a raging river that floods the plains, or as a woman who is the friend of young men, for they are less cautious, more ferocious, and command her with more audacity. Fortuna governs half of our lives, and she is a force of destruction. Virtù is the counterforce. It is not virtue in the Christian sense of moral goodness. It is skill, strength, courage, and cunning. It is the quality of human agency that allows a leader to impose order onto chaos. A leader with Virtù does not wait for the river of Fortuna to flood. He builds dams and embankments during quiet times, preparing for the inevitable storm. Now we can see the full picture. The leader who rules by love is a passive subject of Fortuna. His power is a matter of luck, dependent on the fleeting goodwill of others. When circumstances change, his support will be washed away. But the leader who rules by a well-managed fear is exercising Virtù. He is not relying on luck. He is building his own flood walls. He is mastering the predictable mechanics of human self-interest to create a stable, enduring state. He is seizing control of his own destiny. This is the key Machiavelli offers us. The puzzle of the nice boss is not a puzzle at all. It is a failure of Virtù. It is the story of a leader who, by seeking love, handed their power over to fortune and was inevitably destroyed by it. Part 4. Once you grasp Machiavelli's framework, the modern world begins to look different. You start to see the patterns of Virtù and Fortuna, of love and fear, playing out not just in Renaissance city-states, but in corporate boardrooms, political campaigns, and even in our own daily interactions. The confusion of the modern problem gives way to a moment of startling clarity. Let's begin with a leader who chose love on the world stage, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain. In the late 1930s, facing an aggressive Nazi Germany, Chamberlain pursued a policy of appeasement. He believed that by negotiating in good faith and granting concessions to Hitler, he could satisfy his demands and avoid another catastrophic war. When he returned from signing the Munich Agreement in 1938, which handed a piece of Czechoslovakia to Germany, he was hailed as a hero. The British people, desperate for peace, loved him for it. He spoke of having secured peace for our time. From a Machiavellian perspective, Chamberlain's failure was total and predictable. He was the prince who chose to be loved. He based his strategy on the goodwill and promises of another leader, fundamentally misjudging the boundless ambition of his opponent. He lacked the Virtù to see the harsh reality of the situation, instead relying on the hope that his counterpart would act with honor. He made himself a passive subject of Fortuna, and when Hitler inevitably broke his promises and invaded Poland, Chamberlain's entire strategy collapsed, plunging the world into a war far more devastating than the one he had tried to prevent. His attempt at supreme mercy resulted in supreme cruelty. Now, consider a leader who chose fear. Steve Jobs. Jobs was famously autocratic, demanding, and perfectionistic. He created a culture of fear at Apple. Not fear of physical violence, but fear of mediocrity. Fear of not being good enough. Fear of presenting something to him that was anything less than perfect. There's a legendary story of Jobs calling a Google executive on a Sunday morning because the yellow gradient on the second O in the Google logo on the iPhone icon wasn't quite right. That was the level of his demanding nature. This was his Virtù in action. He used this fear, this relentless pressure for excellence, to forge discipline, innovation, and a series of revolutionary products that changed the world. He avoided being hated because his demands, however harsh, were not arbitrary. They were always in service of the mission, to create insanely great products. He didn't seize his employees' property. He challenged the quality of their work. He established his rule on a foundation he controlled, an unyielding standard of excellence. This dynamic isn't limited to Jobs. We see it in the Machiavellian tactics of other modern titans. Elon Musk's ruthless mass layoffs at Twitter, now X, were a brutal but decisive act to reshape the company in his image, a clear exercise of power. His use of social media to manipulate markets and public perception is a modern form of controlling the narrative, a key Machiavellian tool. In the world of fiction, Logan Roy from the show Succession is a master of Machiavellian strategy, constantly pitting his own children against each other to maintain his grip on power, ensuring no single rival can grow strong enough to challenge him. But the most profound aha moment comes when we realize that the most cutting-edge leadership philosophies of our time are, in essence, attempts to solve the very same problem Machiavelli laid out 500 years ago. They are modern manuals for balancing love and fear. Take Kim Scott's radical candor. Her famous framework is a 2x2 matrix. The vertical axis is care personally. This is Machiavelli's love. The horizontal axis is challenge directly, a productive professional form of Machiavelli's fear. Scott argues that the worst place for a leader to be is in the quadrant of ruinous empathy, high on caring, low on challenging. This is the people-pleasing boss, the leader who is so afraid of hurting someone's feelings that they fail to give them the critical feedback they need to improve, ultimately leading to their failure. It is a perfect diagnosis of the prince who chooses to be loved and ends up ruined. Or consider Jocko Willink's The Dichotomy of Leadership. A former Navy SEAL, Willink argues that leadership is a constant balancing act between opposing forces. The most fundamental dichotomy is to care deeply for your people while simultaneously holding them accountable to high standards to accomplish the mission. One without the other leads to failure. A leader who is all care and no accountability will fail the mission. A leader who is all mission and no care will lose the team. This is a direct echo of Machiavelli's ideal, to be both loved and feared. Finally, there is Brené Brown's simple but powerful mantra. Clear is kind. Unclear is unkind. Brown argues that avoiding tough conversations to protect someone's feelings is not kindness. It is a selfish act to avoid our own discomfort. True kindness is the courage to be clear, direct, and honest, even when it's hard. This is the modern therapeutic language for Machiavelli's economy of violence. A small, upfront dose of discomfort, a clear, direct challenge, prevents the much larger, more painful cruelty of confusion, failure, and broken trust down the line. For 500 years we have tried to run from Machiavelli's conclusion. We have called him a cynic, a monster, a teacher of evil. But today's most respected leadership thinkers are, whether they admit it or not, simply his students. They have sanitized his language, replacing love with caring and fear with accountability. But the core logic remains identical. The fundamental physics of power have not changed. Part 5. So, are we to conclude that the path to success is paved with ruthlessness? That to be an effective leader, one must become a cold, calculating manipulator? No. To stop there is to learn only half the lesson. To see Machiavelli's work as merely a guide for controlling others is to remain trapped in a prison of external validation. The deepest wisdom he offers is not about mastering others, but about mastering yourself. And for this final step on our journey, we turn to another school of ancient wisdom, Stoicism. The Stoics, like Machiavelli, were profound realists about the world. They understood its chaos and unpredictability. But their solution was not to control the world, but to control the one thing they knew they could, their own mind. The core principle of Stoicism is a simple, powerful distinction, separating what is in our control from what is not. External events, the opinions of others, whether people love us or hate us, these things are ultimately not up to us. To stake our peace of mind on them is to become a slave to circumstance. What is in our control? Our thoughts, our principles, our actions, and our responses. This is the domain of our inner freedom. Seen through this lens, Machiavelli's advice is transformed. The goal is not to make people fear you. That is still an attempt to control an external emotion. The true goal is to become a leader of such profound clarity, consistency, and principle that the consequences of actions become predictable. The fear people feel should not be of your temper, but of the natural outcome of their own failure to meet a clear, known standard. You build your foundation not on their fear, but on your own reliability. You build it on what you control. This journey, from naively believing that being liked is the goal, to cynically thinking that instilling fear is the answer, to finally understanding that self-mastery is the true source of power, is a journey toward what the great Brazilian educator Paulo Freire called conscientização, or critical consciousness. We begin with a naive consciousness, accepting the simple, dominant myth: good leaders are liked. Then, through analyzing the failures of this approach and decoding the work of a thinker like Machiavelli, we develop a critical consciousness. We begin to perceive the hidden social and political contradictions, that kindness can be cruel, and that a form of fear can create stability and safety. This is the ultimate empowerment. Machiavelli's lesson is not a license for tyranny, but a call for courage. The courage to be clear when it is easier to be vague. The courage to hold standards when it is easier to let them slide. The courage to seek respect, which is earned, over love, which is given. The most effective leaders do not rule by love or by fear. They lead through a profound and unshakable respect, forged from their own integrity. Love may follow. A healthy fear of consequences will certainly exist. But respect is the bedrock. It is the currency that cannot be devalued by the whims of Fortuna. True leadership is not about managing the emotions of others. It is about mastering your own principles so completely that you create a predictable world in which others can find the freedom to master themselves. The choice is not ultimately between being feared or loved. It is between being a slave to the opinions of others or being the master of your own soul.